Say, okay. And you guys remember the time when I come back from Iraq and you all threw a wonderful party for me, and Dad got up and gave this speech, and then I got up and I had all these remarks that I was going to have, you know, and then I walked up there and I said, you know, before I got up here, God and I knew what I was going to say. Now only God knows. So once again, Dad, you got me a little bit stumped here. For me, and for everybody, you know, Bill, Sue, Kelly, Jerry, Ira, you know, Sherry, I mean, all of us, Earl, all of us in this generation that we're in. And Rosa actually reminded me of this because this is happening too for her family in Spain. We're losing all these people we grew up with that really forged our identity and gave us the values that we have and have shaped our lives in such ways that when we lose them, it feels like a piece of us has gone with them, and in a sense that's happened, and it's even in your case too. And the day that my dad passed away, I was still in Spain with Rosa, and I was talking to Brian on the phone, and I said to him, you know, because my dad was always sort of like his father, a little bit on the patriarchal side, you know that, right, Mrs. Smith, same in your family. And I said, well, you know, Brian, you now moved up to the on-deck circle. Because it's our turn. It's our turn next. And I think this, so some of that is dread, some of that is foreboding, it's dread. But some of that is just the realization of the cycle of life. This is what happens. We come, we make an impact, we do whatever God wants us to do on this earth, and then we go.
It's how we spend our dash.
That's how we spend our dash. That's why your poem is so appropriate. You know, my dad had a good sense of humor. And there's a couple of things, a couple of thoughts that I had. The two things I learned the most from Dad was, one, and those of you who know me well enough, I struggle mightily with this. One, don't take yourself too seriously. And my dad was really good at that. He had a wicked sense of humor. Affable, he got along with anybody. And just, you know, he always looked at the lighter side of life. He was always an eternal optimist. Even, you know, when Rose and I last saw him, and there were very few times, we went up practically every Sunday when we were around to have lunch with him up there, and he was always, you know, he was 100% immobile. I mean, think about this. He's 100% immobile. He's firing now by this time of maybe 1 or 1.5 of whatever 4 cylinders he's got, you know? And yet, the thing that persisted was his character, his optimism, he just lit up when you walked into the room and he saw you. It didn't matter who it was. And that says a lot about a person's character. And my father was certainly a man of character. But he had a sense of humor, and there's one thing that I think this illustrates his humor more than anything else. Is a little sign that he had
at the nursing home.
in the nursing home, and previously from that, in three of his apartments, I think, going all the way back to like the 1990s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't think there's anybody in this room now who more deserves this than Brian. With his two sons. Hang that up, because what's gonna happen, Brian, is your sons are gonna be looking at that, and they're gonna be reading that, and they'll understand what they're reading, but they're not gonna really understand it. But one day they will. Trust me, one day they will. Right, Sharon? Just like we did, taking care of that. So my dad always said, I was telling somebody on the rails, I know this sounds corny as hell, but one of the best memories I ever had with my dad is he took me to the movies in 1970 to see a movie called Kelly's Heroes. And it's a spoof, it's when these guys go rob a bank in Switzerland and then they, and it's with, it's Clint Eastwood and who played Donald Sutherland as Moriarty, the tanker. So we were always like doing the thing back and forth. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Got a great. Yep. Got a great cast. But we always used to have these code words to each other from that film. Like, I'd look at him and say, "Always with the negative waves, Moriarty. Always with the negative waves." And he'd look at me and say, "Have a little faith, baby. Have a little faith." But that was one thing that Dad taught me was just look on the brighter side of things. Even when it's raining, the plants are getting fed. The farmers love it. They may not, but the farmers do. After all, the farmers make the stuff we eat, so it all pulls together. The other thing that I learned from my dad on the more serious side was, and this goes back to what you were talking about, Amanda, that the best way that you can honor somebody, besides, as I said at Annie's, eulogy, that the best way to honor somebody, the best form of revenge is to live well. Let me give that a little bit more granularity, because you can honor somebody, every one of us. Okay, you said you had your moments, and you have done some things that you wish you hadn't done. But you know what? Is there anybody in this room who hasn't? No. And so Poppy, like all of us, had his flaws. I'm sure if Nanny was here, she would probably be here for the next 2 hours telling us all about Poppy's flaws. But at a certain point in my life, that age when you thought up until that time your father was the biggest idiot in the world, and then you knew better. I sat with my dad one time and I said, "Dad, I wanted to tell you something. Dad, my dad and I were very close, as you can imagine, in more ways than most people know. But I said to him, Dad, I want you to understand something. I'm learning from you, and not just the good things that you do, but also the other things that you do. Because here's why. Because I love you, and I want to give value to the things that didn't go well in your life, so that at least something good came out of it." Which goes back to Poppy's first idea about making good out of bad, making anything, seeing the brighter side, not just seeing the bad, but seeing the good and getting the good out of things. And that was my dad. He was. He would always figure out, he'd slip and fall, but by God, he figured out a way to get out. This is a man who, after a series of accidents as a carpenter in the 1970s, reinvented himself, got a little trouble with alcohol and all these different things, but he reinvented himself in the 1980s, went to school with my sister, Doc, and learn how to become an electron microscopist. Now, how in the hell do you go from being a carpenter to being an electron microscopist? Well, that's Dad. That's Dad.
He was good at it.
And he was good at reinventing himself. He was good at just inventing himself too, but we won't go there. But I told my father that because I wanted him to understand that I would say to him, I'm going to avoid that mistake. And not because I was putting him down, or not because I was saying, because I want to learn from your mistakes and not just from the things that you did. Because I love you and I want the things that didn't go well in your life to have value to somebody. So I say that especially to you, my sweetheart. Okay, you can always make good out of bad. And this goes into the last thing I wanted to say. My father and I, we had this conversation a couple of times the last 2 or 3 years. And because he would say to me, Chris, you know, your mother's gone. You know, I'm done with my work. You know, what am I here for? And I said, well, Dad, you remember the time when you and I were sitting down, and you know, my dad was like myself, a pocket philosopher. And I said, you know, sometimes the way you gotta look at life is it's like a soccer game. Because in soccer games, you know, you don't know when the game is exactly gonna end. There's no clock up there that, you know, that says, oh, it's, you know, like in basketball, it's 1.5 seconds left. There's none of that. The referee just blows the whistle and says, that's it, game over. And I said, you know, I kind of think life is like a soccer game. You just keep running and playing as hard as you can until the big ref in the sky says, John, Chris, game over. So to me, and I think I'm wrapping up Dad's attitude, is to me, it's never, first of all, until the ref blows the whistle, we just keep running and playing as hard as we can and doing what we can, the best we can, until you just don't anymore. You know, when the ref blows the whistle and says, game over for you. So as long as you're still playing, as long as you're still alive, you have a chance. You have a chance to reinvent yourself, like my dad did many times. You have a chance to do good out of bad. You have a chance to tell people that you love them, maybe if you haven't or haven't done it lately. Or to reach out to somebody that you haven't reached out to in a long time. There's always a chance as long as you are living. And I think that, in summation, is what my dad's life was all about. There's always a chance as long as you're living. So, this has been here for him. I don't like this drink.
You don't drink that.
That's fine.
Yeah, you do.
He's passed on the baton,
That's right.
or the stir.
He's going to get him a bucket, he's gonna spit that out.
Yeah, order now, thank you.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
That's enough.
I will let Brian take the rest of that time.
It's all dry.
Brian always drinks Manhattans like his Uncle John.
Pass the cup.
That's the cup.
Generation to generation.
You didn't want any?
Okay.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, when I was at one of the
You know, the funny thing about Manhattans is they have a bittersweet taste to them,
Sure do.
That's what I
which is life, right?
Whiskey, right? Is it whiskey or bourbon?
It's
It's bourbon.
You can make
I thought
it
it'd be a
it's
lot worse.
2/3 bourbon and 1/3 sweet vermouth. And my God, this will make your head spin faster.
Rosa, you're driving me.
I'm gonna taste
I'll
it.
finish it with you.
I wanna taste it.
Chairman? Where's Chairman?
We're sharing.
Earl?
Earl likes Manhattan.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna try it.
Don't worry, all that alcohol just burned off all those. A lot of alcohol in that.
Can I get your plate?
You got here on the check.
Oh, yeah, not one, sure.
Back in the day, I had an uncle who was a dentist who used to do a lot of things back in
Oh, really?
All right.
the day.
I'll take that one more.
Is he gonna be sick tonight?
Last draft there, 'cause
Good luck,
you're in
Brian.
the
Oh, Brian, you did good.